The relationship between men and mental health has often been called a silent crisis. On this podcast, we're breaking the silence. Welcome to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Here's your host, Allan Kehler.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in to episode number 2. Yes, we have made it to episode number 2. And today, I am very, very excited to introduce you to a great man, a good friend of mine, Mike Cameron. Mike, welcome.
How you doing, brother?
I'm great. It's really good to see you. Thank you so much for being part of this.
My pleasure. I always enjoy our conversation, so I'm happy to do it in this context. This is great.
Yeah, me too, Mike. I know that you and I both understand the power of a story, and I would argue that there's probably nothing more sacred than someone's story. So to start, I would love to just give you the opportunity to share some of your own experiences, Mike.
Sure. How far back do you want me to go? Where do you want me to take this?
You take it wherever you feel led.
Sure. You know what I find really interesting is, you and I have been chatting for a while, and I've been speaking professionally for 20 years, mostly in the context of sales and leadership, and then most recently in sort of the mental health arena. And even, for the last 5 years, even though I'm not sure I would have sort of called myself a mental health advocate or that, but it's only recently that I've realized that this all ties together. And it's been fascinating for me to see sort of the connection between all these things. So, when you talk about my story, for me, it really goes back to when I was 18 years old and was literally bagging shit for a living. Like, I worked for a garden supply wholesaler and eventually worked my way up through the ranks. And where I started there, I was bagging steer manure. And eventually got into sales. And what I realized at that time was nobody buys a bag of steer manure because they want to own a bag of shit. Like, that's not why we buy steer manure. We buy it for the feeling that we're ultimately going to get when we plant that beautiful rose bush or grow that vegetable garden, that kind of thing. So again, I started realizing the impact that emotions had on human behavior, and really started to work towards how do I do that for my customer as a sales guy. And then, ultimately, as I moved into a leadership role in my business career, having those conversations. And that's what I taught. As I became more and more successful in business and in sales, I would get asked to come speak at conferences and talk about how do you do what you do. And that was always my angle. It's about making that emotional connection. And, it blows my mind to think how that's come so full circle for me, looking at that in the context of sales and leadership. And then what's ultimately brought it back to that mental health standpoint for me was October of 2015. And, I had met a woman. I split from my wife in 2012, and I met a beautiful woman after that in 2015, and things were going wonderfully. And I had done, I'd really spent 3 years kind of alone, single, working on my sort of inner self, and I'd found yoga and meditation, and was doing all the sort of internal work to get to a point where I was ready to sort of step back out into the world, so to speak. And when I met Carissa, that was when kind of things started to come together for me. And, things were starting to get back on track. And it was October 2nd of 2015, and she had spent the night at my place. She was a yoga instructor and often got up early and taught at 6 o'clock in the morning. So that morning, Friday morning, October 2nd, 2015, she woke up at 5 o'clock, alarm went off, got up out of bed, got dressed, came around to my side of the bed and gave me a kiss to say goodbye. And I said, have fun at yoga. And I rolled over and went back to sleep, and eventually got up around, I don't know, 6:45, 7 o'clock, went downstairs, went to make breakfast, shot her a text as was our custom at, 10 after 7. And I said, hey, how was yoga? And I got no response, and, not a big deal. While not a big talker, she was an incredible listener, and as a result, often got caught into these long, drawn-out conversations with students after her yoga class. So I didn't think too much of it, kind of went about my morning, and eventually I hopped in the car to head downtown to a meeting at around 8:30 and shot her another note, no response, picked up the phone, called, phone rang and rang and rang and rang and rang, and ultimately went to voicemail. Went into my first meeting, came out at 10 o'clock, still no response. And, now I'm starting to, like, those stories start to spin in your head, right? Like, is she mad at me? Have I done something wrong? What's, this is just out of character. And then, the stories from, is she angry with me? Have I done something wrong? To, oh my goodness, is she okay? Has something gone sideways? And sort of that was starting to gnaw on me. And ultimately I ended up back at my office for a meeting, which ended up in a lunch meeting. And we walked across the street to go to lunch. And as we walked into the restaurant, as the hostess was about to seat us, my phone rang, and I looked at it, and it was a blocked number. And I answered the phone, and the voice on the other end said, is this Mike Cameron? And I said, yes. And he said, this is Constable so-and-so. And I don't remember his name, but my heart just sank. And I said, is she okay? And he says, where are you? And I practically screamed into the phone. I said, is she okay? And he says, where are you? We're at your house. We're coming to you. So I told him where I was. I turned and I walked out of the restaurant, and I don't even think I said 2 words to my guests at the time. And I stood on the curb for what seemed like hours, but it was probably, 5-6 minutes, because my house wasn't far from where we were. And this unmarked police car pulls up across the street, and these 2 plainclothes cops get out. They got the badge hanging around their neck, the gun on their side, and they start walking across the street towards me. So I walked towards them, and they met me in the middle of the street. And after identifying who I was, he said those 3 words to me that would ultimately change my life. He simply looked me in the eye, and he said, Carissa is dead. And again, at that time, I just, like, this can't be real. This can't be real. And ultimately what I learned had happened was she was shot and killed by an ex-boyfriend who subsequently took his own life. So that whole, we make decisions based on emotion, had come full circle for me. This was a guy that made a decision with very permanent consequences based on a very temporary emotion. And so that's, as I said, that's taken me from a sales and leadership standpoint to, down a substantially different path, which is what's led us to connect, which is just a wonderful thing.
It's hard, Mike, for me to process your experiences. Like, I'm just trying to even get a sense of what it would have been like that day for you. And it's really, it's impossible. Obviously, it was the catalyst for so much for where you've decided to take life. And I feel like what stands out for me is you really wanted to figure out what is it that would cause a man to do what he did. And you became driven and focused to help men not be so disconnected from their emotion. You wanted to strengthen that emotional connection. And you've created things like Connected Men, right? What are some things that you have been able to do to turn, that whole situation from absolute brutality, absolute hell, into something that can potentially help so many other men in their journey?
Yeah, well, as you say, I mean, it was super interesting for me to sort of be able to step back and try and have a look at this experience somewhat objectively. And, I certainly had a lot of people that wanted me to go after the justice system, which, surely let her down. She'd done all the right things, filed the right paperwork, had the restraining order. Like she'd done all the things. And, I'm not going to tell you there were not flaws in the system that let her down, because absolutely there were. But when I looked at, again, I'm a business guy. That's my background. So when I look at, okay, we've got a finite amount of resources, where can we best deploy our resources? So when I looked at me, certainly I could go after the justice system. Certainly I could, try and make legal changes that would do things. But when it came down to it, it was, well, if we build a better restraining order, or, put in laws that lock people up for longer periods of time, that doesn't really solve the problem. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a ruptured jugular. And for me, it just came back to, how do we prevent men like that from getting to that place in the first place? And that's where, again, I tie it back to, that first day at the garden supply wholesale company, where I'm bagging shit, going like, why in the world would somebody buy this? And then tying that back to, not only do we buy based on emotion, I'm a guy that likes to understand the why behind the what. So I'd done a lot of research on the impact that emotion has on human behavior. And again, in my business career, I leveraged that to make connections with my customers so that I could sell more product. Eventually I moved into financial services. And again, same thing, right? It's about making that emotional connection with your customer. And when I looked at that in the context of what happened here, I realized that, again, accepting the premise that we make decisions based on emotion, if we don't understand that underlying emotion that drives those decisions we make, we have zero chance of living a purposeful and fully awakened existence. And, as you're well aware, as guys, I mean, we're actively discouraged from exploring our emotions. So, I really started going down this path of, how do we create what I ended up calling this emotional reconnection practice? And I call it reconnection because, again, you've got kids, as toddlers, I mean, they're not disconnected from their emotions. If you've ever seen a toddler having a tantrum, they're pretty damn good at expressing how they feel in the moment. But somewhere along the line, we get deconditioned from expressing that. So to me, that became a far more palatable solution than, how do we build a better restraining order? Really, how do we help men become more connected with their emotions? Because emotionally connected men don't fucking kill people. Emotionally connected men make better fathers, they make better partners, they make better leaders, they make better employees, they make better human beings. And emotionally connected men don't take their own lives. Like there's so much to it. And again, I'm not sure I sort of realized the magnitude of the work that I started doing, because it was sort of limited scope at the time. But as you and I have discussed lots, it's obviously got so much more broader context than just violence prevention. But again, you look at all of this stuff, all of a substantial amount of the ills in the world don't happen with men that are well connected to themselves emotionally.
Yeah, Mike, you've come back to the word connection a few times. And if you think about, as soon as a child enters into this world, there's this basic need to be loved, right? To be nurtured. They just open up their arms and they look and they just say, somebody love me. Yes. And if those connections are not made, then obviously there's going to be unique challenges. And I think that, even to your point, as a child, there's this tantrum. They are fine with being with their emotion, but then comes a point where they sever from it. And I think that we would both agree that there's a lot of men who are in pain. Yes?
Yes.
And the problem is that we as men don't always know how to manage that pain. And then comes kind of going full circle here with your revelation. I mean, hurt people until someone has the courage to stop the pain. And I go back to that day for you, Mike. And to your point, you chose not so much to focus on the system, but you really wanted to help men heal. And what has that experience been like as you carefully navigate men through their emotions?
Yeah, it's been fascinating for me because, you know, and again, it's been a journey, right? Like, it's not just a, hey, this is what we need to do. You know, there's certainly been an evolution, and for me, it started probably, you know, she was killed in October. I sort of sat with that for a while, and then in January of 2016, so what, 3 months later, you know, that's when I really actively started reaching out in the domestic violence world and looking at, okay, where can I actually make an impact? And so that is what I kept coming back to. But just the connection piece, you know, as you said, is huge. And learning to have empathy for those that are hurting is so hard. It's so hard because sometimes they do horrible things. Sometimes men do horrible things. And so to be able to step back and say, okay, why did you do that horrible thing? And what could we have potentially done to prevent you from getting to that point where you did that horrible thing is hard to do because we often get so caught up. And this comes back to the understanding the emotions piece, right? Even as a society, and I posted something yesterday around porn that sort of speaks to this. We want to be outraged. We want to be furious. We want to be angry. And absolutely, there's justification in being angry. There's justification in being outraged. But that doesn't change anything. So, you know, obviously I had to move through the outrage. I had to move through the anger, and I had to get beyond that. But I recognized that, you know, leading from a place of anger wasn't going to impact change. And I had to work to flip that into, how can I lead from a place of empathy? And that's like, dude, I get goosebumps even saying that. It's hard to say. But how do we get to a point where we can lead with empathy?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's very easy to say, and it is very difficult to do, isn't it? It is a tall order. Christy, you know, the system is flawed. Men dealing with pain, but the partners that deal with the emotion and anger. Yeah, well said. And I know that you also do a lot of work with partners, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, there's so much broken from a system standpoint, but I keep coming back to, okay, so how do we do these? How do we implement upstream solutions rather than downstream, you know, punish them more? Again, protection piece for women, you know, which I'm not going to say we don't need to do, because absolutely we do. Because when you're in the throes of it, you need to know that, you know, I sit on the board of the Strathcona Shelter Society. You need to know as a woman that there are options for you if you need to get out of a bad situation. We need to have those systems in place for sure. We need to have a justice system in place that does the right thing. But for me, you know, it was, where can I be most effective? And again, I look back to that. Okay, so if we can get to a man before he gets to that point, you know, and as you know, I do a lot of work with corporate talking about mental health and wellness. And I think now as I do that, I wonder, and again, I haven't even wrapped my head around this, but I wonder if an employer had gotten a hold of a man at that point before he pulled that gun and took those actions and took that behavior, what might have happened? You know, versus potentially, and again, I don't really know, but potentially, you know, a bad group of friends that, or a society that eggs somebody on and says, oh, dude, you're not going to let that bitch do that to you, are you? Right? Like, I mean, what might have happened, and how do we best set up the system? How do we do our best? You know, guys like you and I, how do we do our best to put these processes in place that maybe we can catch some of that?
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the key points of your book, and you know, on the cover of your book, which is a great read, by the way. I've read probably 2 books in the last 3 years, one of which was yours, so that says something. I found immense value. Highly recommended. This book, on the title, you know, what stood out for me is you said, when something's got to change, maybe it's you. And that is exactly, Mike, I think one of the things that I admire about you. You began to self-reflect. You went within, and I think a lot of men, it's easier to live outside of self, isn't it? And
so much easier.
Yeah, with your groups, what you do is you've created a space where men have the freedom, the permission to feel. And do you mind just sharing a little bit about the SOAR acronym that you use in that group? Because I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, you bet. So I want to circle back to the subtitle, when something's got to change, maybe it's you. That, to be clear, that wasn't I'm pointing at you, Al, something's got to change, it's you.
Right.
That was me reflecting, because, you know, when she was killed, I had many well-meaning friends surround me, pat me on the back, and, you know, without fail, and you see it all the time, right? They shake their head and they say, something's got to change, Al, something's got to change. And so that became my mantra. And every morning I'd wake up and I'd look in that mirror and I'd say, fuck, Mike, something's got to change. Something's got to change. And then it was, you know, the one day where I just stopped and thought, dude, maybe it's you. Maybe it's you that's got to make that change. And so that was kind of taking that responsibility and thinking about, where can I show up and make that impact? So to circle back to your actual question, the SOAR framework, again, after working with a number of men, I created this Connected Men, which is a group. We get together once a week, and literally, as you said, we practice feeling, we practice vulnerability. You know, we all know that if we want to get physically fit, we go to the gym a couple of times a week. Yet, what do we do for our emotional fitness? And the answer for most of us, and especially guys, is jack shit. We don't do anything. So I wanted to create a space that would allow for that. And the framework we use to do that is this SOAR framework. We slow down, we open up, we accept what's there, and the R is we reconnect with our emotional self, reconnect with our purpose. And that has just been huge. So when I talk about open up, so the slow down, I mean, I think, you know, fundamentally we understand that. So just taking a pause, take a breath. And for so many of us, it's hard. Not only is it hard to do, but to your point, it's easy to not do because we don't want to slow down. Because if I slow down, I'm going to have to start paying attention to what's going on in here. And that's fucking scary. So I'm just going to stay busy, go. And I'm going to do that because I'm a dude and I'm driven and I'm an A-type and I'm going to go. So just being intentional about slowing down is the first part. Then opening up. And that's, again, having that courage to really look in the mirror and open up to yourself to say, what's coming up? Is it anger? Maybe it's anger. Is it sadness? Maybe it's sadness. And you've touched on this before, right? Like, let's open up to get to that root emotion, because it may not be the one that's manifesting. There may be something deeper. And then the second part of that open up is being able to connect with guys like you, Allan, and you know what, Al, right now I'm feeling really down. Again, creating a space where men can open up to each other. And then the accept piece, and this is hard, being able to accept what's there. Because oftentimes we don't want to. You know, again, I've got a beautiful house, I got a beautiful family, I've got all my needs, basic needs met, who am I to feel shitty? Right. And then I start beating myself up and I start feeling shitty for feeling shitty, which makes me feel shittier. And it becomes this big spiral. So that acceptance piece is huge. And then once we've slowed down, we've opened up and we've accepted, then we can really start to reconnect with our inner selves and our emotional selves and our purpose. And that's when change happens.
Yeah, exactly. Giving yourself permission to go within. And in your experiences, Mike, do you find that it is exactly at that place where men have the greatest challenge to just give themselves permission to stop distracting and go within?
For sure it is. And again, it's I don't even know if it's a permission thing. It's almost a courage thing, because as you said, it's hard and it's scary. You know what? When I stand there in front of the mirror, drop all that armor, drop all that stereotypical masculine bullshit, and I actually have to face who I really am, like that's a scary thing to do. And, you know, for decades, we work hard to avoid that. So yes, we need to give ourselves permission, but we also have to find the courage to do that.
Yeah, and just the courage for men to be able to enter into this community that you've created is enormous. And I know for myself, it was very difficult just to walk into some of those doors, whether it's virtual or in person. But obviously, vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And what is it exactly that takes place in front of you when you kind of sit back and watch these groups unfold? Like, how would it play out? Because initially, sure, there's anxiety and fear, but what all transpires in your time together?
And again, it depends on the night, but we start with a slow down. So we'll start with a 5 to 10 minute meditation, and we'll just get right here, right now. And it's really about getting out of the head and into the heart, and practicing sitting with whatever's coming up. So usually we'll have a theme for the evening. So, you know, it could be anything from, I think last week our theme was loss. One of the guys had lost a mentor of his, had passed away. So he wanted to talk about loss. And so we talked about loss, and guys shared some of their experience with loss, whether it's the loss of a job, whether it was a loss of a loved one, or what have you. And it's just a space where we can share and not fix. So it's not about fixing. So it's not, if I'm sharing my story and how much that hurts me or how heavy it was, it's not about guys giving me advice on how to fix that. What we practice is, how do I ask questions that are going to take you deeper into that experience? Like, can you describe that feeling? What does that feel like physically? Where do you feel that physically? What's coming up for you? And again, just asking questions, not to fix the problem, but asking questions to help guys go a little bit deeper into whatever that feeling is. And just being able to experience that is huge.
Yeah, having attended one of your sessions, Mike, I can totally understand and appreciate the value that it offers. And I did find it rather intimidating for myself when you started off with the pause, to just be silent. Now, for me, I still at this point am very uncomfortable with my own thoughts because they're very noisy. I'm all over the place, but forcing myself to just be still was very rewarding. And that's one of the best teachings that you've given me, Mike, just the practice of pause. What are some of the takeaways that you're seeing from men? Like, what are some of the rewards that they're saying they're getting from being in this space?
Yeah, again, I think it's, when you can actually slow down, practice that pause, there's a few things. So you start to notice, you start to become much more aware of what's going on, both physically and emotionally for you, so that you can start to recognize and appreciate them more. So not only is it, with things like anger and sadness, that's not what it's all about, but it's also joy. Brene Brown talks about this a lot. We can't selectively numb our emotions. We tend to want to think that, well, we'll just numb out the bad shit. And then, the happy stuff, we'll take all that in. But you can't selectively numb. So the more I get comfortable sitting with my sadness, the more I get comfortable sitting with my joy. And those are the stories that I hear. And again, when guys learn that, you know what, I can be open, I can drop the mask of who I thought the world wanted me to be, and I can just be me. The amount and the level and depth of connection that happens between the men, that's what really, really blew me away. We had one of the first ones, was one of the first, probably in the first 4 weeks that we started running this. I had a guy come in, and he didn't end up coming back because he wrote me a note and said something to the effect, I've still got it saved somewhere, but he wrote me a note and said something to the effect of, I have never been in a space where I've seen so many men be so open, so vulnerable. And what it's made me realize is that I shared more with you guys in that 2 hours than I've shared with my wife in the last 2 years. I've got some work to do. I'll be back when that's done. But what it did for him was it made him realize that just for us creating that space, he opened up. And again, it's this domino effect, right? You see one guy starting to open up and how cathartic that is. Then it gives you permission to. And what he realized was that he hadn't been living that way at home. He'd been, he'd had his guard up, his mask up, even with his partner who he loved, and he hadn't been able to do it. So just that one meeting for him was enough to show him that look at the connection that can happen when we drop our guard. And this, I think Christy, I've just got parts of her talk, but again, when we're talking about how does this impact your partner, how does it impact the relationships? Again, it's that when I can be vulnerable with Michelle, when I can show up who I really am with her, and just know that it's a safe space to do that. The amount of and the level and depth of connection that we have is incredible. And it allows the guys to do the same thing.
And I know that we both meet with so many men who are at that tipping point. Nobody wants to lead a life of pain, right? Nobody wants to live with discomfort, but yet there are all these barriers to be able to get into that space. And you gave a prime example of the benefits that came from that single 2-hour experience. And that's the thing that I find fascinating, because we have to understand that risk leads to reward, right? Are there some tips, Mike, that you find help men to just get over that barrier, to just enter into that space? Or are you hearing some things?
Yeah, I mean, again, the how do we get over that? It comes back to this: when something's got to change, maybe it's you. So, first and foremost, like, you need to be in a place where you're willing to take responsibility for your life, and stop with this. If this, and this didn't happen, then everything would be okay, or then I could do this. It's just such horseshit. Take responsibility for your life, period. Make the changes you need to make, and have the courage to pick up that phone, to make that call, to RSVP for one of these groups, have that conversation with Allan Kehler, read his book. Again, take a step. As you know, I run ultra marathons, and it's not easy when we talk about running 100 miles. That's not easy. And if I got to think about running 100 miles, it ain't going to happen. But all I got to do to run 100 miles is take that first step. And if you don't take that first step, if I don't cross that start line, that 100 miles is never going to happen. So I think it's just understanding that vulnerability is strength. It's not weakness. and I think that's a big part of what holds men back, is we tend to think that, kindness is weakness, that vulnerability is weakness. The way men think about strong is wrong. Like, it's about having that courage. And this is why I keep coming back to the word courage, because I think for most men, courage is something that's high on our list of who we want to be. I want to be courageous. And so guys often talk in the context of courage being avoiding fear or burying or suppressing. And you know what? It doesn't take a whole lot of courage to do that. That's actually the opposite of courage. What takes courage, as we've been talking about, is to be able to actually take that first step, to look in that mirror. True strength is about having that courage to sit with those feelings, observe them, and learn from them what we can. Like that, to me, is huge. And that comes back to, when we talk about grief, for me, one of the catalysts for change, or certainly a shift in perspective, was when my friend sent me a letter to Rachel by Ram Dass. Ram Dass was an American spiritual leader in the 70s. And he wrote this letter to the parents of a young girl who had been murdered. And the letter's like maybe 5 paragraphs. It's really short, but I've probably read it several hundred times since that day. And there were kind of 3 pieces in that letter that he talked about that just hit me like a freight train. Like, it was, for me, it was mind-blowing, and just such a huge shift. First thing he said was, who among us is strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? And when I read that, to your point earlier about what can I learn from this experience? I had choices. I could have curled up into a little ball. I could have dove into a bottle. I could have turned to drugs. I could have done a number of different things. Who among us is strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you are receiving? Probably very few. And it was in that moment that I decided that I was going to remain conscious through that experience. The second thing he said was, our rational minds will never understand, but our hearts, if we keep them open, will find their own intuitive way. And again, I can't tell you how many times I went through this. Why would this happen? Why would this happen to somebody like her? Why would this happen at all? Like, why? And as you can well imagine, I mean, there's no rational answer to that. But our hearts, if we keep them open, if we can learn to keep our hearts open, will find their own intuitive way. And the last piece of that comes back to the strength thing. He said, now is the time to let your grief find expression, no false strength. And that, to me, was kind of the key on all of it. As men, I think we tend to put up this, what I would call false strength, this burying, avoiding, and we legitimately think that it is strength because we've been conditioned that, when you armor up, that's strength. When you refuse to feel, that's strength. And it's just not. And it's just not. And it's not effective. It's not productive, and it's not useful.
Yeah. Wow. Did you navigate through a lot of interesting avenues? And Ram Dass, wow. What an incredible spiritual leader. And I know that, he always says that we're just walking each other home, right? And I think that resonates for me. I know that resonates for you. You talked about expression, and I know the meaning behind the shirt that you're wearing. Make beautiful shit happen, and it's powerful. And what I found interesting is, even when I did the little promo video for our talk today, there was a lot of interest in, I want one. And the story behind it has to do with expression. Do you mind just sharing how that came to fruition?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it was one of my favorite conversations that Chris and I had. And we would often have these, philosophical kinds of conversations like we're having now. And And one of them was on the subject of talent. And I asked her, I said, well, what do you think your talent is? And she said, well, I make things beautiful, which, you know, she absolutely did. She was an artist, a photographer, a videographer, a yogi, a painter, a potter. She had this incredible knack for finding the beauty in the world. And so she reversed it and she said, okay, well, what do you think your talent is? And, you know, I kind of hummed and hawed and I just went, you know, I don't know, not to take away, because by all sort of standard measures, I've been, you know, successful, but I don't know that I have a specific talent or gift as such. And so I said, well, what do you think my talent is? And she answered immediately. She said, oh, you've got a far more useful talent. I said, oh, what's that? She said, yeah, you make shit happen. And I went, oh, all right. As a business guy, I kind of like that. So there you had it. She made things beautiful. I made shit happen. Together, we were going to make beautiful shit happen. So I vowed on that day that I would continue to do my best to make beautiful shit happen in this world. And that's what this means to me. It's just that reminder that we all have the opportunity to make beautiful shit happen in the world, whatever that means to you, wherever that is. And we all have not only the opportunity, but I would say we all have the responsibility to make some little beautiful shit happen in our lives in some little way, shape, or form.
Thanks for sharing that, Mike. That's it's one hell of a tribute, and it provokes such a strong emotional reaction. I know for myself, it's people see the words and it pops, but they don't know the meaning, you know, and I know the meaning, and that's why it's really, it's special to me. It also makes me think, you never know, do you, when the phone rings and you get that kind of call. You also never know the impact that you can have on someone. And I know, Mike, one of the things that you really empower people to do is, I don't know if the viewers can see that in the top corner there. Do you mind just explaining that new shirt for those people who are tuning in via podcast?
Do the fucking work. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's me. And, you know, I talk a lot about values-based from an organizational standpoint when I work with companies and when I work with individuals. You know, I talk about creating a life by design rather than by default. And for me, that starts with values, intentions, and milestones. So for me, one of my values is work ethic. So what I do is I create, you know, define the value, create the value, define the value, create a question I can ask myself every day to know whether I'm living that value. And then the last piece of that is creating a mantra or sort of a 3 or 4 word thing that I can use to prompt me to live that value. So that is what that is. Do the fucking work. So for me as a procrastinator, when I realize that I'm not living in alignment with my value of hard work or work ethic, then that's the mantra that goes through my head. And I tend to swear a bit. So that's it. Do the fucking work, Mike. Do the fucking work. So
yeah, and to Janet's point, you know, she says it well. There's no easier way to say it. Great shirt. Do the ... work. Very true. Yeah. Very true. Mike, you have touched on so many different things in a short amount of time. I know that you offer so many resources, whether it's from your book, the group Connected Men, the training that you do at a corporate level, private level. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
MikeCameron.ca is my home on the web. You should be able to get to my Facebook page and all the other things from there. Anybody's welcome to reach out directly at mike@mikecameron.ca. I'm happy to take any emails. But yeah, Connected Men it's a free group that we've put together and open to anybody that identifies as a man. We run every Wednesday right now at 6:30 p.m. We had a couple of different groups set up before COVID, but we've brought them all into one, and we do that online virtually. So that's free. I also do group coaching. So we've got small groups, so groups of 5 guys. That's paid, but we get together every week and we get very intentional about again, it's called lifestyle by design. So it's about building a life that you want to live by design rather than by default. And then, yeah, of course, keynotes and corporate work as well. And then, of course, I also do one-on-one coaching as well.
Well, I know, Mike, for me, one of the things that I found a lot of value in is you just offer that complimentary call, because there are so many people like myself at one point where I was just so resistant to change. I wanted to do a few things differently, but I didn't necessarily have the courage, as you say, to do it. And I know that you offer that 15-minute call where people can just connect and see whether or not it's a fit, or if they have questions, they can ask it. And so for anyone out there who's maybe listening, who's intrigued, who has some questions, I would really encourage you to just visit the mikecameron.ca and take the 15 minutes to connect.
Yeah, you know what? I found that so valuable, because as much as I love sales and I'm a sales guy at heart, I hate pitching stuff that people don't want. So for me, it's, I know what I have to offer. I know that it's not a fit for everybody. So I would, rather than sort of pitch you on, hey, Al, here's why working with me is going to be a wonderful thing, I would rather just, if you're legitimately curious, let's just schedule. And again, we can do a 60 to 90 minute session. If it's something you legitimately think you want, I will deliver it to you for nothing. And then at the end of that call, I always just say, hey, was that of value? And if the answer is yes, then the next question is, do you want to continue? And if that answer is yes, then we enter into a business relationship. And if not, I've made a new connection, a new friend. And for me, that's what it's all about. I really strive to make at least 2 new connections every single day. So if you guys are listening, you can help me out with that as well, because that's not always easy to do, is making those 2 new connections every day.
Mike, if we did a tally, if we went back through the last 46 minutes and 47 seconds, I'd be curious how many times collectively we used the word connection. But I'm sensing a theme here, right? And that's what I really admire and respect about you, because you've taken the time to do the work, to connect with self, to connect with others, and create something, dare I say, magical. But I want to just wrap things up with something that resonated for me. This was about probably 2 weeks ago, Mike, where I finished your book, and I kind of just put a little note here, and it's only two sentences, but I love what you say. You say, we need more men who will speak up and embrace compassion, empathy, and kindness. We need men to show the world that a combination of these characteristics help to embody what it means to be a real man. And Mike, to me, yeah, you are a real man. I love the way that you navigate through life. I love how you've taken tragedy and you didn't curl up and hibernate. You took it and you did something incredibly powerful with it. And you have my utmost respect. I thank you so much for taking the time to share some of your insights, experiences, and wisdom. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, man. And back at you. Thank you for creating this platform for guys to share their stories. Because as you said, it's through the sharing of stories that change happens. Because, we can talk statistics all day long. I can rattle off domestic violence statistics all day long, and people, yeah, that's terrible. That's terrible. But when you share a story, like, that's when something's got to change.
Mike, look at us. We started off with the whole story, and then somehow magically we tied it all in with a bow at the end. So, hey.
It's like we do this for a living or something.
Or something, yes. Well, listen, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who took the time to tune in. And in the meantime, everybody, keep talking. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to Mental Health. It's time to talk. Bye, Mike.
See ya.